Hello, hi, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I hope you're doing well. I'm looking down, I'm just going to check that I am live in all the places. I hope you're doing really well. I wanted to drop in, talk about the carbon economy, and I recently did a talk about this and the context in Australia and what is going on in the Australian market. But to be specific, what I want to talk about today is how this carbon economy is evolving and specifically focusing on Australia and the clean tech space and what's really happening. So stick around, say hello if you're joining me live, drop in a comment, tell us where you're from and what you do. I'd love to know. I host these sessions every Wednesday at 12:30 Australian Eastern Daylight Time on Wednesdays. And so they're really just to share information and bring up topics that are in the market at the moment, trends, and speak on those trends and really help us understand sustainability in a broader perspective. So stick around. I'm looking to talk about the carbon economy today. And so I'm going to just share my screen. Hopefully you can see what I am showing you. So give me a moment. Here we are. Cool. So that should come up now. I'm going to keep my face relatively big. So some of it might be small if you're looking at it on a phone, but hopefully you get the idea of what I'm talking about. So really, if we've kind of been following the carbon economy and the evolution of this, I mean, yes, Australia had a carbon market a decade or so ago, if I'm getting my timeframes right, thereafter. But alongside that, there was, of course, that GFC crisis that hit in 2008. We all know about that. And the aftermath of that was that part of it was looking at our financial systems and understanding our financial frameworks and our economy and how we can make better decisions so that we don't have a similar crash in the future. But alongside that, the idea that climate change is going to be a very huge risk to the economy, to businesses, to communities, to nations, really everyone at every level. And so we have to be thinking about climate change if we want to be combating the financial impacts and those risks as well that cause those financial impacts. So the Paris Agreement was born, and Australia has been a signatory on that for a long time now. But our commitments, so really what it's called, the term is the nationally determined contributions, that each nation who has signed the Paris Agreement says this is what we're actually going to do. This is our commitment to meeting our carbon budget. Hey, how are you, Vasutavan? I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Nice to see you. So you're here from Supia in Malaysia. Very cool. You're working in the oil and gas business. Amazing stuff. So everybody needs to be, in this space talking about it. Oil, gas, mining, all of the industries. So anyways, the Paris Agreement, we've been a signatory for a long time, and it's only now in the last year, in fact, in July last year, we actually put forward a really a much stronger commitment around our carbon budget and what we're going to be doing in order to meet that. But in the years before, it's certainly been a really feeble commitment. And of course, Australia's also been going through, let's say, a very warlike political climate around climate change. I mean, that topic has just been thrown around and not been valued like the way it should have been all this while. So now that we are on this path and we're actually really actively looking at climate change, we're looking at more sustainable governance and systems. Of course, clean tech is a big part of that. So in order to meet the carbon budgets that Australia committed to, we have to be looking at clean technology. So that space has been growing despite the lack of government support. But the reason as well that it's been growing is there's obviously a lot of economic value to it. And now with this kind of political shift that's happening and a few other reasons, there is a small slowdown in the rate of growth, but we're seeing that in Australia in the next few years, there's going to be this rapid boom of even more renewables than ever before. And when you really think about how much has already grown so much in the last 5 to 7 years, roughly, from we being at a point where we were looking at abolishing our renewable energy target to now actually having 32.5% of Australian energy or electricity being supplied by renewable sources. So there's been a huge growth in Australia. And you can see from these trends, there's obviously a big contribution from some of those key renewable technologies. And it's really incredible to see this space evolve. And as this space evolves, of course, looking at fossil fuels are going to start going down. And we're seeing that drop already because Australia is committed to net zero by 2050 as a nation, but there are some really key goals before that. And certainly the states are pushing for even stronger targets around this because 2050 is just way too far away. We need to be doing this as soon as possible. And, ideally we'd love to have to do this by 2030. But realistically, 2040, I think 2040 is a goal. So if you're listening, you're a politician, put that on the agenda, please. But really, it has to be possible to do, and certainly it is a big goal and it is a big journey. So seeing that this space is growing is really wonderful, and really wanting to share, why this is growing. What are the drivers for this type of growth in terms of clean technology? Warmer temperatures. So Tanya, you've just mentioned here, warmer temperatures can cause economic loss for a country through many pathways, lowering agricultural yields, reducing labor productivity, and so on. So this is the interesting thing about climate change. It is, and sustainability is a facilitator for responding to climate change, and it isn't something that we can put on the back burner anymore, because it actually is at a fundamental core level a human issue. It is an issue of humanity because it affects our health, it affects our productivity, our ability to work, our availability of food, so many really important things. So great point that you made here, and certainly part of why the Paris Agreement is so important, because it isn't just looking at things in isolation. It's that there's these 17 goals and they cover absolutely everything, hopefully. Maybe if I look at it closer, maybe there's something missing, but really it's a very comprehensive set of goals, and moving down a clear carbon pathway is a really big part of trying to mitigate emissions and waste, and being more clever about our resource usage. So some of the players in the clean technology space in Australia are some of these companies, and it isn't just renewable energy companies. There are lots of mining companies that are part of this growth, because of course mining of certain minerals are a really key part of supporting the clean tech space. So we have to kind of understand the important players in this space, and why we've got to work together with the mining companies, and why even the renewable energy companies, just because they're renewable energy and that's what they're supplying, doesn't make them automatically the best choice or the most sustainable in terms of their operations and their actual materials and products. So we have to be really looking at all of this quite holistically. But I digress, because really what I came here to do is talk about the growth that is happening in Australia. So I'm going to flip over to the slide that really is about what are the drivers for the clean tech space in Australia. So there are a number of factors, and large-scale renewable energy has probably been the one that's grown the most, just because, and of course, residential scale, having solar on our roof, that's really rapid because the government had a lot of funding around that, and people love that because it means they get to go off the grid and they don't have to pay as much on their electricity bills. But large-scale solar has probably the one that's had the biggest growth since 2016. And the thing is, that's some of the factors about why there has been such huge amounts of growth is that our wholesale electricity has been rapidly increasing over the years, and it's probably at its highest point now. And really the fact that there's been a lack of policy incentives, and there hasn't been enough support around why companies should be going down the clean tech pathway. So there hasn't been as much of that sort of medium scale growth. But these large-scale developers, they know that there is a huge economic opportunity for them, and so that has grown really easily in our economy. And now what we're starting to see or realize really in Australia is not only can we be a really big resource for Australians to have a fully clean electricity market, but we can also position as a really strong distributor of clean energy, not technology, but clean energy, especially to some of the surrounding islands and surrounding countries. We can be an immediate and really close supplier of this clean energy. And so it's a huge opportunity for clean tech to kind of grow now at all levels. So with the technology that has advanced so rapidly in the last few years, the levelized cost, so the way to compare traditional fossil fuel energy and how it's made, how the plant is built and how it's made, and compare it easily to renewable energy, because they're two very different technologies. But even within renewables, comparing wind to solar, two very different technologies. So the way that we look at it is the levelized cost of energy, LCOE. And so when you look at that, you start to see that renewables, or most of the clean tech, is a lot lower. The LCOE is a lot lower than fossil fuel derived energy. And that's because the technology has just advanced so quickly in this space that it's made it a lot cheaper, a lot more easily accessible. And so there's been, a huge growth in that space. But now what we're facing is, great, we've got all this renewable energy going, big part of our grid is supplied by renewable energy, but how is the grid handling it? How are we transitioning through this? How are we storing that energy? Because it's one thing to keep creating that energy, but certainly a lot of it gets lost when it's not being stored. So if you've got a development that is making much more than can actually be put back into the grid effectively, then a lot of it does get kind of sent to who knows where, right? To the black hole, to the abyss. And so we have to have a way of really managing this transition. Because one thing is, yes, the levelized cost of renewables lower, but when we add in storage, really, that is a key bump up of the price. So these are part of the factors that are impacting the market. And these are the things that now many companies are looking at actively, because they know that overall, despite these sort of hurdles, there is a huge opportunity to kind of grow the renewable market at all levels and start to really lay out a clear carbon market. Because if you joined me last week, I did actually talk about that, like what is this carbon market looking like, and who are the key players in terms of that sort of that policy space and managing this process of decarbonization and supporting more and more decarbonization. So overall, to summate it up, large-scale renewables has been the place where we've seen the biggest growth in renewables in Australia. And that's because despite there being not a huge amount of government policy, whatever policy has been there has primarily supported those large-scale developers. And the other thing is the large-scale developers have more money and can actually get their return on investment much quicker for the level that they are building at and what they're ultimately supplying to the market. So now this is an opportunity to sort of get the market working better at all levels, at large scale, at medium scale, and at the small scale. So what investors are starting to look at now is, who are the companies that are looking at this transmission piece and this entire process of kind of transitioning to a entirely clean, decentralized network, because we've traditionally had a very centralized network, which has worked really well so far. But when we're looking at a clean energy market, there is a need for it to be a little bit more decentralized, for people to have more power in the market and how it works. Obviously, NFTs, blockchain technology, that is starting to come into play as well, where people can trade themselves from a household level, from an individual level, into the wholesale market. So the market is really starting to change now, and so what is, I feel, going to happen, and what I'm seeing as well from what I'm reading, is in the next few years there is going to be a bit of a transitionary period, and it's not going to be just kind of rapid growth. It's a lot of transitionary stuff that's happening as a market really starts to form and the foundations of it really start to solidify. But beyond that, there is going to be a huge pace of rapid growth. And what's going to come into play in impacting that is having the grid much more stabilized, having the wholesale market decentralized, having a strong government policy in place, clear roadmap as well around that policy, and also the storage piece being really resolved to a much more affordable level, because right now it's really quite expensive and only viable if you're making lots of money, you're a big developer, and you can certainly afford it. So it's going to be interesting to watch this space, and I think that a big part of this growth that we are going to see eventually is going to come as well from more and more PPPs in place, so private-public partnerships and alliances between government bodies and industry partnerships as well, industry research partnerships. And this is where it's going to be really interesting. And I think along the way, there's going to be certainly a lot of disruption to the market, because it takes years to really transition. That initial growth of the clean tech space was not as disruptive because the grid could handle it. There was not as much impact on sort of the entire wholesale energy market. But now we're going to start seeing that really come into play. And so it's interesting. I mean, these are just my thoughts on it. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course. So I can see as well, there's a comment come through. So all global governments are slowly adapting or condescending to this cause. Oh, okay, so yes, they're not quite receptive to this cause, and so therefore the actions that they take are obviously not reflective. Yeah, very true, and that is the case in many countries around the world. But I think what's really fascinating to me is Australia actually, because of the space that we have, the amount of land that we have, and the weather, the climate that we experience, we actually have a huge opportunity. So it is actually also an economic opportunity. Let's talk business here for a moment, because this is an economy after all. And the reality is we can actually make a lot of money doing this, a lot of good, clean money doing this, building these offshore, onshore developments and making it accessible at all levels. So not just the large scale, but the medium to small to medium to very small, individual scale. That makes it really easy for people to be a part of the system, part of the decision making. So it's decentralized, it's direct connection to people through potentially blockchain technology. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about that really tech side of this space, but this is what needs to kind of happen. And we have a huge opportunity here in Australia in particular to position as one of those leaders. So that's why I find that is really interesting, that we haven't really supported this so far. And there's been so much resistance to it, and the kind of the coal-fired plants have just been, remained such an important kind of stoic idea of how we can make money in Australia and how we can succeed in Australia. So it's really interesting to watch this space evolve. I think I have a lot of hope for it ultimately. So look, I'm just going to end a little bit on the opportunity for companies to be thinking about clean technology, and why, the return on this investment is really going to bring a lot of value to your business, to your community, to your stakeholders. The ROI is becoming much more lucrative. So the return on these investments are becoming a lot more lucrative, and really it's becoming clear that over these next few years, as we transition from kind of a very dynamic part of the market transition, when I say dynamic, I really mean disruptive as well. Now it's starting to sort of find its place. And as it does over the next few years, we're going to see this ROI become really evident in the medium to longer term. So obviously in the nearer term, right now, in the next year, in the next 2 years, we may not see it, but in the next, 4 to 5 years plus, we're certainly going to see a lot of return on these investments of projects that start to take action now, that start to build, those relationships, those PPEs, those alliances, those partnerships. And I said the word partnerships twice, but they start to build those out and really start to shift the conversation around what can be a priority for businesses in Australia. So yeah, it's a really really interesting thing, and I know that this space is going to grow because, I mean, just on one point in particular, like the LCOE, the levelized cost of energy for a renewable plant in the last, let's say, I think it would roughly be the last 5 years, has rapidly decreased. So essentially what I'm saying is that at one point, the levelized cost of building a renewable plant was a lot higher. And in terms of whether it was comparable to fossil fuel, I'm not sure. I still think that the fossil fuel plants were higher level of cost. But given that the renewable LCOE was not a lot lower than fossil fuel plants, even just 5 years ago, it meant it wasn't always an obvious choice. But now the LCOE is a lot lower. So it is a lot cheaper to build these plants and start to distribute renewable energy and clean, using clean technology into the wholesale market. So it's just becoming more and more of a reason for us to kind of move down this pathway. And I think a key part of moving down this pathway is something that I touch on in probably any talk that I do, is that your stakeholders need to be on board. The community, essentially the community, the people who work in your business, the investors, the people who buy from your business, who support your business, the key decision makers within your business. There's just so many different people in the stakeholder sort of network that you need to be considering, and you need to be bringing them on board. You need to be listening to them and using what they say to leverage the right opportunities as you emerge into this space or expand into this space. So those are my thoughts. If you have any questions, let me know. I appreciate your comments today with Suthavan. Really appreciate you all being here. Thanks for joining me. And next time, the rest of you that have joined and stayed on, say hello, because I definitely don't bite. But yeah, it's been really nice to have you here. I am going to set up a session for next Wednesday, so I hope you will join me then. Still thinking about what the topic might be, but if you have any thoughts, feel free to share them. I'm always open to suggestions, but I'm going to stop sharing now. Hope you have an incredible day. Take care of yourselves. I'm going to have my first proper coffee for today, and it is 1:00, so that's exciting for me. Take care, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.